Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Hagen. I work here at Autodesk. Welcome to another Autodesk webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about 3ds Max and the powers of it. I wanted to introduce Paul Neal, who's going to be presenting to us today. Hey, Paul.
How are you?
Doing
How's
well. How you doing?
everybody? Everybody doing well? Um, so would you like me to introduce my history in this business there, Hagen? Or
Yeah, go for it. Tell us a little bit
okay.
about your background.
Yeah, so I've been around the 3D business for, I guess it's 30 years or something at this point. I started way back in the day when a chrome teapot was a pretty cool idea and everybody was impressed by it. They don't seem so impressed by chrome teapots anymore. They expect more. I've
Dancing
worked in
babies.
just, yeah, I've worked in just about every field going, it seems. I'm not just media entertainment. A lot of people see me as a character rigger. It's probably the least of what I've done over the years. It's just what's been most visible, I guess. But I've worked in AAA game titles and feature films to mobile games and broadcast television, but as well as aerospace, medical, engineering, architectural visualization. It just kind of list goes on of things that I would even have a hard time explaining what they are without another hour-long webinar. I've luckily had my hand in a lot of different things. How's that? So it's been a lot of fun over the last 30 years.
I don't think I've ever done any one thing besides exist for 30 years, so props to you. You must enjoy it.
Yes, I do. It's always a challenge. I like new and interesting different things. I like projects that make me stop and go, I had no idea what you're talking about. So let's first develop a dialogue and then I can help figure out how to help you, which has been a lot of fun. When Lockheed Martin Aerospace came to me and said, hey, we launched satellites into space and we need to, visualize that process. That was, I almost thought it was a joke, the person who called me. I literally thought that the person was just pulling my leg. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? And they're like, no, we're quite serious. That was all done in 3ds Max. They still do it in Max, where they're visualizing the processing of satellites. Who knew, right? But it's what it's being used for. So, or one of the many
That's
things it's being used for.
That's fascinating. Do you do any work in architecture visualization, or is that something that you've not done
Yes.
too much?
Yeah, I've
Okay.
done I've done a fair bit. Generally, in those cases, I'm often developing pipeline tools and abilities for their architects, or in the engineering and whatnot. I'm generally writing tools, developing tool sets. Sometimes doing models, sometimes setting up shaders or things that are going to be reusable by their artists to simplify processes. That's one of my go-to things that people come to me for.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of things that people go to people for, we actually engaged with you recently on a series, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen if you want to talk a little
Yep.
bit about the recent engagement on the Autodesk YouTube channel.
Yeah. Autodesk came to me and said, "Hey, can we do something about modeling?" So, wondering how many people have seen this series and watched this series so far. I don't know if that's one of our questions that's supposed to come up, and here I am asking
Right.
it prematurely. Um, but I was brought on board to discuss ways of modeling that aren't the typical just sort of, hey, let's poly model everything. Let's show what can be done and how it can be done. So I'm a if you haven't been to my YouTube channel, I often discuss ways of going about doing things that are a lot of people feel is out of the ordinary, and I don't, because I look for the shortcuts for everything. I try to explain to my students, because I'm also a professor, that I'm way lazier than they are, in that I go out of my way to learn ways to finish work early. Right. So I was sort of lazy smart in a sense. So I look for the methods that will take me the least amount of time to get to the best end product. And that's, that's something you should be doing in production. It's a competitive market out there now. And if you can't work competitively, you could be in trouble because somebody else is going to come along and be able to, complete jobs faster than you can.
Absolutely. So as far as this scene goes, like what kind of tools and workflows did you focus most on?
Well, this is mostly procedural modeling. There's very little in this that has been created using poly modeling. Very, very little. The pieces of wood, for instance, are the only real thing that are modeled and are a poly model. The rest of this entire scene is all modifier stack work off of procedurally based objects. um, for the most part, anyways. I don't know if there's many other things that I've actually modeled. The only thing I'd say I modeled were sometimes splines, but again, that would be like 5 points on a spline, making an entire model or something. Um, and the whole thing was put together, if you watch the series, where I can then move and take objects and be able to manipulate them and have them update automatically. This is one of my, I guess it should be on my top 10 list of things, is that I tend to sort of um, rig models to help me model, because I know for a fact art directors are going to lean over my shoulder and go, hey, can we make the bridge longer? And I can go, sure, because I've modeled it in a way to be able to do that with just a spinner. And, it helps, especially if you're in a situation where you're making assets for maybe a TV series where you're often going back and you're going to reuse this bridge in multiple shots and different shows next year's series. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you don't have to rethink it every single time and remodel it? You can drop it in and resize it, and away you go. The show moves on, right? Um, it sort of gives you superpowers as an artist if you're able to save production's time and be able to get things done. Is the best way to look at it.
The box modeler in me is screaming, but as soon as you show the bridge, it all clicks, I think.
Yeah, it's just, and again, this is 100% procedurally. This, box. You want box modeling? This is literally a box. It's a
Right.
box. That's all it is. There's nothing else to that other than a box. Um, and then just stacks of modifiers. Working with it. Now, what I get sometimes is, yeah, but your way around this, and it's slow for me to think about this and do this. Well, as an artist in this business, you've got to stay on top of your tool sets, whether it be Max or your texturing applications, your sculpting applications, whatever it is. Like, there's all these tertiary applications and whatnot that we got to be using all the time. You've got to learn them. You got to stay on top of them and understand the technology and what can be done. And that means in Max, playing around with the, just myriad of modifiers that come with it. One of my favorite pet peeves is when artists come to me and go, "Hey, Paul, could you write us a tool that does?" And I'm like, "That's been in Max since Max 1." And I've literally had that conversation many, many, many times over the years. That tool has been around since Max 1. And it's there, use it. So when anytime a new piece of software comes up for me that is something I'm going to have to use in production, I invest time in understanding the depths of it, and it just makes you more powerful, essentially.
I think for the way I was taught, whatever, however long I would go, I was in school 15 years ago, was that in games workflows, you do want to collapse everything before you export it out. But that is that the case anymore?
um, no, it never has been the case.
Yeah.
Essentially, when you export, something like these corn stalks that I had selected here, and you need that over in a video game, you don't need to collapse this stack. You simply don't need to do it. When you export to an FBX or an OBJ or whatever format you're using, it automatically is taking the top of the stack and sending it out to the exporter. Okay, so it's taking the end result. There has been the odd occasion I've found where certain things may not, but test first. I don't like collapsing objects unless I have to. It's the very end of my process, to do that. And because the idea being is I want to be able to make changes quickly, and effectively in production, where when you suddenly there's productions never go in a linear fashion. They don't start at the start and end at the end. They do this cyclical thing, and they slowly kind of move along, right? You just keep going and you go back again, right? So you have to almost plan for that. You have to go into your productions knowing that things are going to be done over and over again until they're right as the production grows. And the more you can plan for that ahead of time, the faster and easier your production is over the course of the production.
I think that this scene is such a multifaceted scene. I was so impressed when I saw it, and I did skip around in the series a little bit, but I think it would behoove me to mention that this webinar is called the Top 10 Golden Rules, um, written by Paul Neal, on stone. No, but I think that you skipped around last time we did this webinar, and maybe we could set ourselves a challenge. Do you want to start at number one, Paul's top tip in 3ds Max when working
I'm going to start at number one, but never. Not if you know me and have worked with me, nothing ever goes as planned, because I like to be flexible, like I just talked about. So my number one is be flexible and use procedural modeling as much as you possibly can. That always gets misconstrued by people, and they go, well, you can't procedurally model a car. You're right, polymodel it. That's how I'd model that. I'm saying as often as you can, as much as you possibly can, use your procedural modeling. Even then, procedural modeling might get you 80% of the way there. It doesn't get you the end product. Well, that's great. That's fantastic, is that use it to get yourself 80% of the way, rough things in, and then complete them as a poly model if you have to. But that's one of my number ones, is use the modifier stack in Max and for what it's good for. And that's going to speed things up. And then the second one I've kind of mentioned, know when not to poly model, know when not to procedurally model, and know when to go and say, I need to poly model. Again, something like a car, I've got tutorials up on my YouTube channel, and there's a process I go through there, and nothing is procedural other than mirroring the car and subdivision surfacing, which are procedural. But the base of the car is poly modeled, and know when to go and do that. I don't remember which way I stepped around these things last time, so I'll just go with it and have fun with it. My number three is stack order matters. When you're looking at the modifier stack, play with ideas. When you're looking at elements like this, well, what would happen if you stuck the relax above array, the noise below the array? What's going to change when you do that? And a lot changes. If you stick the noise below the array, that means that every single one of the boxes has got the same noise on it and has then been arrayed out. Sticking it above the array means that now there's a different bit of noise on each and every element, because it's putting noise in the whole thing. So play around with your stack orders and understand where things should be. I'm going to make sure this is stated, that what you see in my videos when I do them, whether it's this one or other ones on my YouTube channel, is a way of doing things, not the way. It is a way of doing things. There is no singular way of going about doing stuff, and you need to have a bag of tricks, sort of thing. And I'm going to skip down to one that, or two, my 5 and 6, and come back to 4. Um, one of the things I get these comments on is, yeah, but it's all triangles. It's all, triangled out here and whatnot with my optimize on here. There is nothing wrong with that, by the way. Everybody gets hung up on quads. Yet what it comes down to is there is no such thing as a quad, especially if you're exporting out to a game engine. It's all triangles, and it always is. Making a basic box, and everybody goes, yeah, but it's quads. Well, it's actually not, because if you were to go into this and go and take a look at the hidden edges, it's all triangles to begin with. So everybody gets hung up on it. Now, when that does matter is when you're subdividing it with a subdivision surface modifier like Turbo Smooth or Open Subdiv or something. Quads are cleaner and work better. But especially if you're going out to games, you're generally never using them in the first place. And if you're modeling hard surface objects and whatnot, you really don't need to worry about all those perfect quads. I've always had that discussion. So here's one of those models that this looks perfect. It renders perfectly. It has no issues, no errors, no problems on the surface. Yet you can see there's a whole lot of hidden triangles in there in those meshes. And this is, again, 100% procedurally modeled. This is just boxes, rectangles, spheres. This is 100% procedurally modeled. I didn't poly model anything. Well, actually, it's not true. I think there was a piece or two somewhere, little pieces I was messing around. Oh, on this one, there was a piece or two I played around with something, but I probably should have just done it procedurally. So even those are all just procedurally modeled and can be changed because the modifier stack, is just Boolean objects and whatnot. So they're clean, they're neat, they render perfectly. Why are you worried about your quads all the time when that's going to get kicked out to a game, let's say? And so when to collapse is something to know. When do you have to do it? Well, none of these objects in this case are unwrapped. And the unwrap modifier is not procedural. You're unwrapping vertex number 47 and placing it on a UV grid. So one of the things you should do once you get down to unwrapping, generally you want to collapse a stack at that point. That's one of those cases where I'm going to say, okay, unless you are very careful that you don't blow it up. And what I mean by that is that if you, change the model below the unwrap, you can basically pooch the unwrap. It'll suddenly become invalid and reset itself. I always get students come to me, Max, lost its UVs. And it's like, no, you lost your UVs. You just don't know why yet that you did it. It doesn't just dump the UVs. You did it. And so, there's a certain point where you want to collapse things and whatnot. Where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So I guess another one that comes up a lot is the questions about mesh versus polys. I get that all the time. Is what's the difference with a mesh versus a poly in Max? A lot of softwares don't have the option, is what it boils down to. There is no choice. But a mesh, if I go over to this mesh, and I'll make this one a poly, mesh objects are very, very fast. And the reason they're very, very fast is they're very, very simple. For that simple reason, we don't have access to things like our poly modeling tools. We can't do edge loops. We can't do edge rings. We can't with the poly modeling, with like we can with poly modeling. It's sort of very basic modeling. It's very original modeling. We used to make 3 vertices, make a triangle, add 2 more vertices, make a triangle, believe it or not. Very slow process. But for that reason, they're very fast. And that's how a game engine thinks, for instance. Frankly, when you hit render, everything's converted to a mesh, and it's thinking about triangles only, because triangles are super fast. It's always the same. There's three vertices, 1 face, 3 vertices, 1 face, 3 vertices, 1 face. And it's very easy for the systems to process. Whereas poly models allow you to be able to do, things like the edge looping and edge rings, and being able to go and add, them very, very quickly. But there's a price on processing at that point. It costs more, in a sense, for your system to generate the poly model than it does to generate the mesh model. That being said, I would never go in mesh model. But what I will do is, once I'm finished a model, I will sometimes go and collapse it down to an editable mesh. You can generally go back and forth without any issue whatsoever. Generally, for instance, anytime I rig characters and those characters need to be as fast as possible for the animator to calculate, the base is always a mesh, not a poly, because it's going to calculate faster. Very careful though. It's possible to create meshes that produce an illegal poly. So if you have two faces with three vertices in a mesh, you can actually create two faces. One points one way, one points the other way, and they share the same three vertices. If you convert that to an editable poly, you now have six vertices, and it says you can't have three vertices and have two faces. So what will happen is people will import from, say, a downloaded mesh, and they'll take that mesh and they'll want to make morph targets for a face. So they'll convert the target. They've made a copy of the original, and they'll convert it to a poly, and then try and add it to Morpher, and Morpher won't allow them to add it. And that's because there is errors in the mesh the poly doesn't understand, and you'll end up with unalike. So what I'll have to do in that case is I'll convert things to polys and back to meshes. So I force it to be a poly and understand it as a poly, and then go back to a mesh again. So I know everything's going to be working as it should, essentially.
Paul, are there any mesh cleanup tools that you really kind of adhere by, or is it just strictly modifiers that you kind of lean on for that?
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of inspection tools. There's XView that you can use that'll show you things like open edges and everything else. There's other cleanup modifiers that'll help you. Um, I rarely use them because I make sure that I guess my thing is I tend to know what not to do. So I rarely actually use them. Only when I'm bringing in somebody else's mesh. Somebody's modeled the character and it comes in. The first thing I do is then clean it up and make sure that it doesn't have floating vertices or things of that nature, that it doesn't have open edges, doesn't the center lines with the center lines resetting X form, all that kind of stuff. So passing over all those cleanup processes. Maybe that's a good video in itself one day, how to clean up
Right.
stuff.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
just was always top of mind for me just when interop importing stuff from CAD and such.
yeah,
You know that whole bag.
CAD models can be a disaster,
Oh
right?
my God,
Because
right?
they're thinking completely different. They're thinking in solids and their surfaces and whatnot. Convert all that to polygons, and you can end up with a big mess on your hands. In that case, sometimes I actually remodel things.
Hmm.
Don't tell my clients.
That's
Only
actually,
because
oh, go
it
ahead.
can be cleaner and faster just to go ahead and remodel it. If it's a small
Yeah.
part, it's like, this is going to be faster and easier instead of trying to clean up this mess that's kind of come in. It helps.
Importing CAD and ArchViz stuff. That's how I first learned about floating point precision and World Space Zero the trials and tribulations therein. But I wanted to note a few things before we continue. One being, I saw the survey pop up, the first one, and it looks like a lot of folks have had a fair amount of experience in Max. So I do have a few questions on that for you, Paul.
Sure.
But before I mention it, I see there's two people with their hand raised. Please, if you haven't already, put your questions in the Q&A section, and we can get those in maybe 10 minutes after we go over a few more tools. But Paul, I wanted to know, I definitely want to continue on this track of top 10, but
Mhm.
is there like a tool that you found recently, just either rediscovered or in the past, year have found a new appreciation for that you hadn't in the past in Max?
Interesting. Um, that's a hard one. Uh,
I know. Thank you.
I kind of want to say no because um, I've always tend to I'm always looking, sort of for the things I've forgotten about. And a lot of people just they get into a singular mindset of how to do things. And I've always spent time breaking myself out of that singular mindset, um, and finding ways. So I, I literally just spend time playing on every project and looking for things and going, can I use that? Can I use that? Can I do this? Can I do? So I'm always passing over things. So off the top of my head, I can't think of something. But yeah, there every now and then again something pops up and go, oh, I forgot about that. Especially something like the loft tool, for instance. That's old school, and it's not very procedural, and whatnot. It literally comes from the DOS version. But every now and again, I go, wait, I can use the loft tool for that, right? Because it's powerful what it does. So especially if you're going to be animating it, which is interesting. The things you can get away with it. So. Um, Not offhand. You want me to go back to the top 10 or
Yeah, feel free. We do have a
yeah,
couple questions in the chat, but we can get to those after we power through a few more top tens.
sure, okay. Instancing controllers and whatnot. So save yourself time and effort with modeling. It's been recently, a couple versions ago, made a lot easier to be able to take things and say, well, I want to take this and say, copy controller, and just go down and say paste instance. You can always break the instances, but whenever I need things that are going to be locked together, I do that all the time. And not just on a single object, but between modifiers and across many objects. I'm constantly doing this sort of thing as I model to ensure that I don't have to go and change two spinners. The thought pattern is that, well, it takes me a longer time to go in and copy and paste it than it does two spinners. But back to the idea that productions aren't linear, they're always doing this kind of thing. I know I'm going to have to go back and change that spinner again. So that 2 seconds it takes me to copy an instance or wire together some parameters that I know need to stay the same, it just simplifies my life, when I do have to make those changes, because the art director has made a call and wants it different. It's just really, really fast to be able to do. So instancing your controllers, whether or not you're even having to go and do it through your dope sheet or curve editor, whether you're going into the motion panel, because everything's been added to the motion panel now, so we can go in and do it in the motion panel, and copy and paste instance controllers, or initiate wire parameters. It'll save you time in the long run, a lot of time in the long run. Oh yeah, the other one I wanted to talk about is the idea of that I see all the time and again, and I yell and scream at my students. But this is a procedural object, and then they go in and they add an edit poly modifier to it and start modeling this into a character. So they've gone and they've started doing whatever they're going to do to this. Um, using the smart extrude and whatever else. And there's a couple problems here. One, you're taking a box. A box is a mesh. You stuck an edit poly on top of it, and you're converting it to a poly. That conversion takes time, just so you know. So you got to be careful in the stack as to whether or not it's converting to a mesh to a poly to a mesh to a poly. And it's one of those things that sometimes just takes time to learn what it is. But the problem here is if I ever step back down to the base of the stack and I just turned on show end result with my hotkey and I make changes, well, that's bad. right? I changed the poly count, and editable poly is not procedural. The box is. So your problem can be is if you change the proceduralism below the non-procedural modifier, usually something like an edit poly, you can blow up your model. This is back to that idea with unwraps. Making sure you collapse your stack on those if need be, and knowing not to touch underneath the unwrap, and knowing it'll blow it up if you have to, sort of thing, right? So that's careful, being careful there that you're working effectively. If you need to do that sort of thing, just go to a poly, model with a poly. Polys are editable poly, by the way, is, I forget, it's magnitudes faster than edit poly modifier. Magnitudes faster. I'll use edit poly sometimes where it's like, I'm going to add a change here. I'm not sure I want to keep it, and so I'll use an edit poly, but at some point I'll usually collapse it back down again. Once I get to a certain point and go, yeah, I'm not changing that now. I'll just collapse it down. Oh yeah, the one that I think I got to last time, and I should note this. A comment I often make, to students and whatnot, and to other people, is that animation tools or modeling tools or whatever they were made for, VFX tools or whatever it is, are not that. They are simply a tool, and that tool can be used in all sorts of ways. So consistently, for instance, using what is considered to be an animation tool to model. So I'm using things like skin wrap, which is effectively, people go, oh, that's for characters. No, it's not. It's for binding vertices of one mesh to another mesh. How can you use it? So, don't get stuck on that. That's an animation tool. I've used skin. I've skinned things so that I can actually model them, right? In more effectively, because I can deform the mesh with other sort of, call them control objects. It's not for animation. It's strictly for the modeling process. So, skin wrap is one that I use a lot. In this case, I have done a sim on this, and simmed this net into place. And who wants to try and sim that? I mean, that would be a nightmare to sim. But wrapping it to a simple, a plane, and simming the plane with cloth makes your life easy and simple, right? So, that's what I've done in this. It's covered in my tutorial, my breakdown tutorial, and how I went about doing some of this. I believe it is. It's been a while since I've looked at it. But yeah, tools are tools. Understand what they do and use them whenever you need them. Okay, is a big one. I'm going to flip the order on this one down to number 11. So I don't have a top 10 list. I added another one. And this one is MaxScript Python is just a tool. And everybody sort of say, I hear that, well, I'm an animator. I don't need to script. I'm a modeler. I don't need to script. I'm a whatever, and that's just simply not the case. It's really not hard to learn how to utilize just things like the macro recorder sometimes. I keep doing this set of things. I just need a button and dropping it onto a button bar. It's really easy to do. Looking at the help file and grabbing chunks out of there, or asking and learning how to start writing simple bits of script, 1-liners, 2-liners, 3-liners, and you'll suddenly find that it speeds everything up once you start doing it. It's just a tool like every other tool in the software. Get to know it, get to understand it. Yeah, people go, but I've never coded. Neither had I. Okay. I was asked at Disney to write a UI for a character, and I went, sure. And I learned how to MaxScript right then and there. Don't tell them that. Well, that was like, 27 years ago now or something. And then the last one is interesting because I'm actually turning you away from my own YouTube channel in this one, but use the help files. Go to the help files first for answers for things. I always get these questions that are specific about a tool, and I'm thinking, well, just pop open the help file. It'll tell you how to use the array modifier and what that option does. If that doesn't make sense after playing around with it, then go look for tutorials, because the tutorials are often covering a bigger thing or showing you how to do something specific with it. And that comes back to a thing where I get students and whatnot saying to me, or even industry professionals have been around a long time, that does this. I'm thinking, no, 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 it can do all kinds of things. That's the only way you've seen it used, but it can do lots more, right? And sometimes just digging into the help files will give you that kind of information, especially learning MaxScript, by the way. I get that, there's not a lot of tutorials out there for MaxScript or whatever. Yes, there are. Open the help files. There's a pile of stuff. How to write. I forget what it is in the help file there, but there are all these how-to examples on how to get started on learning MaxScript. And it's really, really, really easy, get going on it and start writing those one-liners, so that'll save you time and effort. That's for sure.
We just had
The
another
AI, the AI
question pop
question.
up. So would love your thoughts on this question actually, Paul, because we were talking before the webinar started about, AI integration and, the industry and the way it's trending. So what are your high level thoughts or kind of a 2 year even projection out?
Yeah, the high level thoughts are it's really neat. And from what I understand, that some really cool stuff's been shown at SIGGRAPH just recently, and people were all wowed and go, "Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job." But you always have to remember when you're watching, demos, they're very pre-canned, right? And now you try and use that same thing in production and go, "It won't make this robot." I can't get it exact, and clients are going to have very specific things. So I see AI as yet another tool. That's all really it comes down to. Everybody lost their minds when ZBrush came around, and you didn't have to mesh model or poly model anything anymore. It was complicated. I remember people literally saying it's cheating, and I'm thinking, no, it's a tool. That's all it is. And things are going to change. The way we do things are going to change. Everything that I do now in production didn't exist when I started the industry 30 years ago. It's all changed. How we go about doing things. So AI is just another change. Simple as that. It's just another thing it's giving us, new capabilities. I'm not panicking over it. I don't think anybody else should. But back to my idea ages ago that I talked about, learn your tools. Don't go, I'm not using AI. Go and learn about it. Go and figure out how you can incorporate it. It's here. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's not changing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think it's all about balance. Years ago, I think about this too often, but I almost did a good job doing comics, and I met a group of folks that were working on the project already. And one of the guys, he was like, "Oh, yeah, I don't, I do use Photoshop very sparingly, but I refuse to use layers." And I think about that so much because I was like, man, like to each their own, but also you're not using the power of in this case
No.
Photoshop or
Yeah.
whatever the tool it was. But yeah,
I had a student tell me that for 3 years. He was an amazing painter, and he said, I am not using layers. And I kept going to him. I said, can you move that tree to the left a little bit? And he'd rub the whole thing out and repaint the tree. And he actually got hired because he was so skilled as an artist. And it was about a year later, he came back to me and he went, Paul, I use layers for everything now. Because it's like one of those things. He was forced to be effective and learn his tools. So yeah, learn your tools. Don't have that idea that somehow I'm not going to use that thing because I'm going to be stubborn. Well, you're shooting yourself in the foot at that point.
Right. So I do want to do a time check. We're at 6:45, so we got about 15 minutes. I figure we could pivot but to some of the questions. So if you are on the call, feel free to use the Q&A section of the webinar. Keep them coming in, and Paul and I will do our best to field those questions. Before I do, there is another poll quiz that we would like to hear from you on. If you want to talk to an Autodesk representative, please, we have a host of experts that would love to speak with you about 3ds Max or Maya or whatever else under the sun. We would love to chat with you. So if you do want to take a moment to fill out that quiz, feel free. Going back to the questions, though, I see Rob Holmes asking, I see data channel a lot in your stacks. What's the
Yeah,
reason for that?
it's a powerful tool. It takes a little bit of time to understand what it's doing, but like anything in the modifier stack, it's just processing vertex data, right? It's just all modifiers do is push around vertices. That's all they do. It's how are you pushing those vertices around? How are you pushing that data around in a sense, right? And so data channel, if you watch this tutorial series, I'm using it for several things. One, you'll notice that when I turn it off, in this case, in these walls, that they are all the rocks are the same depth in this case, and the nice coloring, the variation of coloring is gone away. Turn on data channel, and you suddenly get a variation of height going on, and a variation of color happening automatically. And I'm using data channel in all kinds of different ways to be able to process vertex data to be able to get my solutions that I do procedurally. I can, I think if you watch the tutorial again, I can repaint this and change this wall, and it just automatically does everything for me. So data channel is something to learn what it does. Now, I guess one of the things is what do you do will depend on how you can use it. But I strongly suggest you understand it. It's sort of like a modifier stack in the modifier stack, but it allows you to be able to come up with unique processing ways of processing data. In this case, I'm actually using things like distort, which is allowing me to input texture maps, and I'm using OSL maps to create procedurally generated ways of basically selecting the stones. I'm using things like geoquantize and different outputs and whatnot all the time in my stacks because they can help. Now, data channel can also help with things like character rigging, creating edgeware masks. There's all these presets you can work with. Delta Mush will help you soften, skinning, solutions. And auto crease weights. I use it for everything. I use it for animation and modeling and VFX and all sorts of stuff. So, it's a beautiful tool. I don't know if that
Is it
helps you at all.
I think it helps me understand the modifier, that's for sure. Is it something that's neither, it can be deformable or not, like either way, it doesn't
Sure.
matter how it's applied?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. I mean, the data in it can be animated. So I could animate this strength value, for instance. I could animate the textures driving the distort. And then if you're adding other operators, maybe I'm using something like a smooth in there, or I'm using a scale. All those values and everything can all be animated, which means they've got controllers, which means controllers can be instanced. They can be wired to, they can be driven by wire parameters or other controllers. That you could have procedural animation controllers on them. It just, as you start playing with this sort of stuff, you'll suddenly realize, holy smokes, I can go down all kinds of rabbit holes and use them in all kinds of ways.
Can I bake down a data channel as far as like if I want to export something like an
You don't need,
animation?
again, you don't need to. That's an editable poly now, so it's retained all the data.
Okay. So FBX
So
will retain.
Yeah, if I export that, yeah, it'll retain those channels. Now I'm outputting in this case out to map channels. So I'm actually outputting the data that I'm generating here to map channels and to vertex position channels. That's all retained. So if I sent this over to a game engine, I may not, I could drive things like the textures in Unreal Engine with its shader system and just read the same data, right? Read the same data that's being utilized here to be able to add the color changes. I don't have to use the materials out of Max. I could go somewhere else with it. It'll also export generally because it's vertex data. It'll generally export out to other softwares and you can use it wherever. So very, very handy to do that. Should we grab the last one here?
Yeah, Nadish asks, in daily life, we face the challenge of importing models from Rhino. The modeling and normals are always weirdly flipped. As we are not experts in modeling, we sometimes face challenges in modeling curved surfaces. Have you fallen into similar situations? And what would be the workflow for modeling curved surfaces?
So um, I guess to start with the first one, the flipped normals, is a couple of tools you can use that will help you identify what the flip normals are. Is one, it's edit normals, and it'll give you all the normals on a mesh, so it'll identify all those normals. Do something a little less. So it'll identify which way the normals point really quickly for you and be able to work with that. There is also, of course, the normal modifier. And the normal modifier has the unify normals, which will sometimes help you be able to get your normals to point in the correct directions. So that's, a couple tools that'll help you sort of start cleaning up some meshes. So I don't know if you've discovered those yet, but and I guess what you're saying then, we sometimes face challenges in modeling curved surfaces. Well, I guess it depends on what sort of curved surfaces you're modeling. But if you're modeling something like this, for instance, I'll just do it real quick and we'll add a turbo smooth modifier. Turbo smooth modifier is a subdivision surface, so you can see it's subdividing the surface. But stepping to the bottom of the stack and grabbing vertices, I'll show the end result here. Whoops, sorry, show the end result. You can see that what it's doing is it's producing a curved surface. So this is working much like a NURBS surface does, but it's a whole lot less forgiving, okay, than dealing with NURBS surfaces, because it's pretty easy to go and do all kinds of stuff with it. So, I guess the trick is that, you're going to have to learn some different tools. You can do NURBS modeling in Max, but if you're already using Rhino, I wouldn't. NURBS, surfaces in Max haven't been touched since Max 2, I don't think. Because we just don't work that way in this side of the industry. It's always, it's always being done, in a subdivision surface mentality, thanks to Pixar. I don't know if that helps you, but that's one way. Spline modeling, so again, I'd suggest you go take a look at my tutorials, which I guess is a good segue into this, right? Some of the stuff, but if you haven't found my YouTube channel, please go find my YouTube channel, and I show all kinds of ways that I do things. I discuss alternative ways. And again, I want to really preface this, that what I show isn't the way. They are a way of doing things. Sometimes the down dirty little quick one, the scissor lift, I saw it asked, and so I went and set it up because people were talking about using trig and all kinds of mathematics, and I went, no, you don't have to do any of that. Here's an easy way of doing it. Other ones are this globby goo ball mess thing that I saw somewhere, and I thought, hey, that'd be fun, and it's using modifiers from 20 years ago. to more complex things. Like I've got a series on modeling cars, which would be good for learning that organic surface. How do you model a car with polygons as opposed to NURBS? And how do you work with those sorts of tool sets? And what's the mindset to going about modeling this? So it's a 4-part series or 5-part series, I think, on it. There's a setup, and then there's four videos on how to do that sort of thing. So there's lots of information here that can get you some of those answers and whatnot. Other place you can go is my website, paulneal.com. I don't keep it up as much as I probably should. It looks like I'm in edit mode here, and it's telling me I need to update something. But anyways, so I've got some basic information. But some of the things I have then are some quick down and dirty tutorials on how to do stuff, and things that can save you some time, like understanding what the hotkeys are for poly modeling. Use your hotkeys. That should be my tip number 12. Learn your hotkey. Any piece of software you learn in Photoshop, go learn the hotkeys. Stop clicking on buttons that you can forget about. Students sometimes ask me, "How do you do that?" And I go, and I have to look at a keyboard, and I realize when I look at the keyboard, I don't know. I have to just sit down, put my hand over it, and go, "Oh, that's how you do it," right? It's like I'm just so used to hitting the hotkeys.
How do you ride a bike, Paul?
Yeah, well, that's just it. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, because I do a lot of mountain biking. I couldn't even tell you. So on Hagen's request here, I've got tons of these infographics that I produce, often for students. Sometimes they go hand in hand. This is a tutorial on my my YouTube. It's kind of a reminder tutorial about how I did some of the stuff that's covered. Same with this one. Same with that, same with that. Some of these are just eye candy, me showing off, using Max Creation Graph and wiring and all kinds of stuff that I've done, and scripted tool sets and all kinds of things. And then others will give you some insight into settings, simple lighting setups in this case, and whatnot, and ways I've gone about doing things. So they might help you kind of understand maybe even just what's possible, or even what some people tell me they get when they read these. They don't necessarily fully understand it, but they go, "I didn't even know about the Arnold properties modifier. I need to go find out about that. What does it do?" Lots of information just in these. And then there's other stuff. There's my scripts downloads and whatnot. I think you have to right click. People keep telling me you can't get to them, but you have to right click and say download, I think, or something. Save link as, I can't remember. It's messed up, but I just don't have time to keep up my my website all the time.
It's a hustle, that's for sure. I was so impressed when you first showed me those infographics. Just you just pack so much incredible information into those images. Um, we're gonna it looks like we might have another quick question come in the chat. Let's see. But if not, can I get screen share back real quick, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course you can.
We're going to wrap up here in a few moments, but for those that caught the tail end, we will be having this uploaded to YouTube. So fear not, you will be able to catch the first part if you missed anything, and feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues and such. Few quick scans if you want. The 3ds Max Ideas community is a fantastic place if you do have any issues and or ideas with Max that you would like to see incorporated. Feel free to go to that forum, and as well as the 3ds Max Discord is a fantastic group of folks in there every day that are super awesome. They're great to just chat with and or help you troubleshoot anything or give you a second opinion on a composition. So I wanted to quickly get those on folks' radar. Autodesk is at SIGGRAPH right now. So if you have an inkling and are in the Denver area, feel free, or if you're just generally interested, there's the QR code for that. And the vision series for that also will be later on uploaded to the Autodesk M&E YouTube. So that's it from me. Looks like we have one more question quickly. See if we can. Nope, doesn't
Nope.
look like Stefan got a chance. But so appreciate you, Paul, and
Thank
all
you.
of you for taking the time out of your day to join us and talk about 3ds Max.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was a lot of fun again. Thanks for having me.
All right, appreciate everyone on the call, and
Yep.
see you in the next one.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining in.